The Mediterranean lies vast and timeless, cradled between continents like a mirror held beneath a sky. Its waters shimmer in hues of sapphire and jade, shifting with the light of dawn and dusk, hiding beneath their surface the movements of civilizations, the whispers of traders, the ambitions of empires. For thousands of years, this inland sea has been the connective thread binding disparate cultures: Egyptian, Greek, Phoenician, each leaving their mark upon its shores, each adding their voice to the chorus of human endeavour. Yet in the 3rd century before the Common Era, 2 cities rise into prominence, 2 powers destined to collide with a force that will reshape the ancient world forever. Rome emerges from the mists of legend and the sweat of labour, built upon 7 hills overlooking the bend of the Tiber River. It is a city of farmers who learned to become soldiers, of shepherds who became senators, of rough stone structures that would one day support marble temples gleaming white beneath the Italian sun. The Romans are bound by discipline, by a sense of collective purpose that transcends individual ambition. Their republic is young, forged through internal struggle between patrician and plebeian, tempered by constant warfare with neighbouring tribes and city-states. They have conquered the Etruscans to the north, subdued the Samnites in the mountains, pushed southward into the Greek colonies of Magna Graecia. Yet for all their expansion across the Italian peninsula, Rome remains fundamentally a land power, its armies marching on roads that connect fortified towns, its citizens viewing the sea with a mixture of fascination and suspicion. Across that same sea, beyond the horizon where the sun sets in pools of molten gold, Carthage stands as a jewel of the ancient world. Founded centuries earlier by Phoenician colonists from Tyre, it has grown into something far greater than its mother city ever imagined. Carthage commands the western Mediterranean with a confidence born from generations of maritime supremacy. Its harbour is a wonder of engineering, a circular military port hidden behind narrow channels, capable of sheltering hundreds of warships beneath covered docks, protected from both weather and enemy eyes. The city's wealth flows from trade routes that stretch from the Pillars of Hercules to the shores of distant islands, carrying tin from Britannia, silver from Iberian mines, amber from the cold northern coasts, ivory and gold from the heart of Africa. Carthaginian merchants are masters of their craft, negotiating in multiple languages, calculating profits on wax tablets, their ships cutting through waves with practiced ease. The 2 cities exist in separate orbits, Rome expanding overland, Carthage dominating the waves. They have no shared borders, no ancient grievances, no territorial disputes that might naturally lead to conflict. And yet, perhaps inevitably, perhaps with the slow certainty of tides drawn by the moon, they begin to take notice of one another. Roman legions pushing southward encounter Greek cities that trade with Carthage. Carthaginian merchants watch with interest as Roman power consolidates across Italia. Neither seeks confrontation, but neither is willing to acknowledge the primacy of the other. The Mediterranean, which has seen countless civilizations rise and fall, watches with the patience of eternity as these 2 powers drift toward their fateful meeting. Between Italia and the coast of Africa, suspended in the blue expanse like a stepping stone placed by some ancient god, lies the island of Sicily. It is a land of contrasts, volcanic mountains crowned with snow, fertile plains heavy with grain, cities both Greek and Carthaginian clinging to its rocky coasts. For generations, Sicily has been contested ground, a patchwork of competing powers and shifting alliances. Carthage controls the western portion of the island, including the great city of Ecnomus, its harbours and fortifications standing as monuments to Punic ambition. The Greeks hold the east, led by the magnificent Syracuse, whose walls and theatres rival anything in Athens or Corinth. Between these giants, smaller cities navigate survival through diplomacy, tribute, and careful neutrality. In the year 264 BC, a seemingly minor incident occurs in the city of Messina, perched on the northeastern tip of Sicily, where the narrow strait separates the island from the Italian mainland. A group of Italian mercenaries called the Mamertines, the Sons of Mars, have seized control of the city through treachery and violence. Now they find themselves threatened by Syracuse, whose King Hero II sees an opportunity to expand his domain and eliminate these troublesome bandits. The Mamertines, desperate, send appeals in multiple directions. Carthage responds first, sending a garrison to protect the city and maintain the balance of power. But the Mamertines, fearing Carthaginian dominance as much as Syracusan conquest, send a second appeal across the strait to Rome. The Roman Senate debates long into the night, voices echoing beneath vaulted ceilings, torches casting dancing shadows on ancient walls. Some senators argue against involvement. These Mamertines are criminals, brigands unworthy of Roman protection. Others see opportunity, a chance to establish Roman influence beyond the peninsula for the first time. The arguments continue, positions harden, until finally a decision is made not in the Senate but before the assembled people. Rome will answer Messana's call. Legions are mustered, ships requisitioned from Greek allies, and for the first time in their history, a Roman army crosses water with the intention of conquest. Carthage watches from across the strait, its admirals and generals initially dismissive of this new development. Rome has no fleet worthy of the name, no tradition of naval warfare, no understanding of the Mediterranean's moods and dangers. The Carthaginians have commanded these waters for centuries, their quinqueremes, massive warships powered by 5 banks of oars, representing the pinnacle of naval engineering. What can Rome possibly accomplish against such overwhelming maritime superiority? And yet there is something unsettling in Rome's brazen crossing, something that speaks to an ambition that will not be easily deterred. The year is 264 BC, and neither Rome nor Carthage fully comprehends what they have begun. Neither seeks total war, neither envisions a conflict that will span generations and consume hundreds of thousands of lives. They imagine a limited engagement, a brief assertion of influence over this disputed island. But Sicily will prove to be the spark that ignites a fire lasting more than a century, a conflagration that will transform both civilizations and ultimately leave only one standing. The First Punic War begins not with declarations or fanfare, but with the quiet, inexorable pull of destiny, like waves gathering strength far out at sea before crashing upon the shore. Rome faces an immediate and seemingly insurmountable challenge. The war it has entered is fundamentally naval, and Rome has no navy. For generations, the Romans have been content to leave maritime matters to their Greek allies in southern Italia, focusing their own energies on the land campaigns that built their republic. But now, committed to a conflict across water, facing an enemy whose very identity is tied to the sea, Rome must learn an entirely new form of warfare, or accept defeat before truly beginning. Fortune, or perhaps the gods, provides an opportunity. A Carthaginian quinquereme, perhaps driven off course by storms or pursuing Roman supply ships too aggressively, runs aground on the Italian coast. Roman soldiers and engineers swarm over the captured vessel like ants examining some massive, intricate creation. They measure every dimension, study every joint where planks meet frame, document the arrangement of oars and the mechanics of steering. This single ship becomes the template, the blueprint for Rome's transformation from land power to maritime force. Forests along the Italian coast begin to fall beneath axes, the rhythmic sound of chopping echoing through valleys and across hillsides. Pine and oak are felled, stripped, shaped, dragged to newly established shipyards where the air fills with the smell of fresh-cut wood and boiling pitch. Skilled shipwrights, many recruited from Greek allies, oversee the construction, while Roman engineers apply their particular genius for organization and standardization. If Rome cannot match Carthaginian expertise developed over centuries, it will overwhelm them with volume and efficiency. Production becomes systematic, almost industrial in its coordination. Ships take shape in parallel construction, each hull following the pattern of the captured vessel, each following the same measured specifications, but ships alone are not sufficient. Carthaginian crews have trained since childhood, learning the complex choreography required to propel massive warships through water, to coordinate dozens of oarsmen into a single unified motion. Rome has no such tradition, no pool of experienced rowers to draw upon, and so, in a display of characteristic pragmatism that borders on the absurd, wooden benches are constructed in fields far from any water. Aspiring oarsmen sit in rows upon dry land, practicing the motions of rowing, learning to move in synchronized rhythm, pulling against imaginary resistance while trainers walk between the rows correcting form, calling out the cadence. They look ridiculous, perhaps, these men rowing through grass and dirt, but they are learning, developing muscle memory, building the coordination that will be required when they finally take to the waves. While Rome builds and trains, Carthage watches with a mixture of amusement and growing concern. The Roman navy, such as it is, begins to take shape with surprising speed. Within months, more than 100 quinqueremes stand ready, their hulls sealed with pitch, their decks fitted with a Roman innovation that will change everything, the corvus. The corvus is brutally simple, almost crude in its conception, yet devastatingly effective. It is a boarding bridge, approximately 36 feet in length, fitted to the prow of each Roman warship. When an enemy vessel draws near, the corvus is raised like a pointing finger, then released to fall with tremendous force onto the enemy deck. A heavy spike on the bridge's underside pierces through wooden planking, locking the two ships together in a fatal embrace. What follows is not naval combat as Carthage understands it. No ramming, no complex maneuvers, no centuries of accumulated seamanship. Instead, Roman soldiers charge across the bridge as if attacking a fortress wall, transforming a sea battle into the kind of close-quarters infantry combat at which Rome excels. The first test comes in 260 BC off the coast of Mylae in northern Sicily. A Carthaginian fleet, confident in its superiority, moves to engage the Roman ships. The Carthaginian admiral anticipates an easy victory, perhaps even the destruction of Rome's entire fledgling navy in a single engagement. His ships move with practiced precision, oars rising and falling in perfect rhythm, bronze rams cutting through the water, ready to punch through enemy hulls below the waterline. But as the fleets close, Roman ships deploy their corvii. The boarding bridges fall like hammers crashing onto Carthaginian decks, and suddenly the Mediterranean's greatest navy finds itself engaged in hand-to-hand combats against Rome's legendary infantry. Carthaginian sailors, trained for naval warfare, face legionaries who have drilled endlessly in swordwork and shield formations. The result is a slaughter. Ship after ship is boarded, its crew overwhelmed, its decks running red. The Carthaginian fleet breaks and flees, leaving behind dozens of captured vessels and hundreds of dead. Rome has won its first naval battle. The sea, once foreign and forbidding, begins its transformation into a second homeland. Romans will never match Carthaginian natural seamanship, their inborn understanding of wind and current and wave. But they have found a way to neutralize that advantage, to force naval combat to conform to Roman strengths. The corvus represents a revolution in Mediterranean warfare, and Carthage, for the first time in living memory, faces a challenger who can meet them on the water. The years that follow unfold with the slow, grinding inevitability of millstones crushing grain. The First Punic War settles into a pattern of fleet actions and siege warfare, of campaigns launched with hope and ambition, only to founder against the reality of distance, disease, and the Mediterranean's capricious weather. Neither side proves capable of delivering a knockout blow, and so the war grinds on, season after season, year after year, consuming treasure and lives in quantities that would have been unimaginable when the conflict began. Roman fleets grow increasingly confident, venturing further from Italian shores. In 256 BC, at Cape Ecnomus off the southern coast of Sicily, nearly 300,000 men clash in what will remain the largest naval battle in history for more than a millennium. The Roman fleet, numbering some 330 ships, carries legions intended for an invasion of Africa itself. Carthage, recognizing the existential threat, musters its full naval strength to stop them. The battle unfolds across miles of open water, fought in 4 distinct stages as formations wheel and reform. Ships ram and grapple, men fight and die beneath the summer sun. By day's end, Rome claims victory, having sunk or captured more than 90 Carthaginian vessels. The path to Africa lies open. The Roman invasion of Africa begins with confidence bordering on hubris. Legions land near ancient Carthage, establishing fortified camps, ravaging the countryside, expecting the Carthaginian Senate to sue for peace rather than risk the city itself. But Carthage does not fold. Instead, they hire a Spartan mercenary commander named Xanthippus, who reorganizes their army and leads it to a devastating victory at the Battle of Tunis. The Romans, so successful in Italia and Sicily, find the open plains of Africa favour Carthaginian cavalry and war elephants. Their army is destroyed, its commander captured, the survivors clinging to their coastal fortifications and praying for evacuation. The fleet sent to rescue the remnants of the African expedition succeeds in retrieving the survivors, but then encounters something more terrible than any enemy, the Mediterranean in storm. As they sail along Sicily's southern coast, the weather turns violent. Waves the size of buildings rise from churning darkness. Winds tear at sails and rigging, ships lose sight of one another in the chaos. When the tempest finally subsides, more than 280 ships have been lost, perhaps 100,000 men drowned or dashed against rocks. In a single day, Rome loses more lives to weather than to any battle. It is one of the worst maritime disasters in recorded history. Yet Rome rebuilds, the Senate levies new taxes, Italian forests fall once more, shipyards resume their endless labour. Carthage, heartened by the Roman disaster, pushes back in Sicily, recapturing territory, besieging Roman-held cities. The war enters a phase of exhaustion on both sides, each launching campaigns they lack the resources to sustain, each suffering losses that would normally compel negotiation, yet neither willing to yield. More fleets sink in storms, the Mediterranean seems to fight alongside Carthage, drowning Roman ambitions with wind and wave. After another catastrophic loss in 253 BC, Rome abandons major naval operations for nearly a decade, focusing on the grinding land war in Sicily. Cities change hands, fields are burned, populations are enslaved or scattered. The war that was supposed to be brief and decisive enters its second decade, then its third. The turning point comes through exhaustion rather than brilliance. By 242 BC, both sides are financially depleted, their populations weary, their initial war aims long forgotten beneath the weight of cumulative suffering. Rome makes one final effort, building yet another fleet through a kind of public crowdfunding. Wealthy citizens financing ship construction as an investment in peace. This fleet engages the Carthaginian navy at the Battle of the Aegates Islands in 241 BC. The Carthaginians, having neglected their navy during the land-focused middle years of the war, field inadequately trained crews on poorly maintained ships. The Roman fleet, benefiting from 2 decades of accumulated experience, achieves a decisive victory. Carthage, bankrupt and facing revolt from its unpaid mercenaries, accepts peace. The terms are harsh but not impossible. Sicily ceded to Rome, an indemnity paid in installments over 10 years, all prisoners of war repatriated. The First Punic War ends after 23 years, having consumed immeasurable wealth and perhaps 250,000 lives. Rome gains Sicily, its first province beyond the Italian mainland, the first step on a path that will lead to empire. Carthage retains its African heartland and its Spanish territories, diminished but far from destroyed. The peace that follows is uneasy, marked by mutual suspicion and festering resentment. Carthage struggles with a brutal mercenary war as soldiers who fought on its behalf, unpaid and abandoned, turn against the city they served. Rome, taking advantage of Carthaginian weakness, seizes Sardinia and Corsica, adding insult to injury, demanding additional indemnity for the privilege. These actions plant seeds of hatred that will bear terrible fruit. In Carthage, the Barca family emerges from the war with enhanced prestige. Hamilcar Barca, one of Carthage's most successful commanders during the later stages of the war, harbours a particular loathing for Rome. He sees the peace not as an ending, but as an intermission, a chance to rebuild strength for an inevitable second round. When Carthage looks to Spain as a source of recovery, its silver mines and manpower offering the possibility of renewal, Hamilcar volunteers to lead the effort. Before departing for Iberia, Hamilcar performs a ritual that will echo through history. He takes his young son Hannibal, barely 9 years old, to a sacred altar dedicated to the gods. There, in the presence of divine witnesses, he makes the boy swear an oath, placing his small hand upon the sacrificial offering. The words of that oath are recorded by historians writing decades later. "I swear never to be a friend to Rome." The boy speaks the words, perhaps not fully understanding their weight, certainly not imagining how they will shape his life and the fate of civilizations, but an oath sworn before the gods is binding, eternal. Hamilcar's hatred becomes his son's inheritance. The Barca family transforms Carthage's Iberian territories over the following years. Hamilcar campaigns among the Spanish tribes, conquering some, allying with others, securing control over the rich silver mines that will fund Carthage's resurgence. He builds New Carthage, a magnificent city on the Spanish coast that serves as both military base and economic capital. When Hamilcar dies in battle in 228 BC, his son-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair continues the project, using diplomacy and consolidation to strengthen Carthaginian hold. And all the while young Hannibal watches and learns, accompanying his father and then his brother-in-law on campaigns, absorbing lessons in warfare, strategy, and the complex art of maintaining loyalty among diverse peoples. Hannibal Barca comes into his inheritance in 221 BC, barely 25 years old when the army in Spain acclaims him as commander. He is young, but no one questions his fitness for command. He has lived among soldiers since childhood, has fought in numerous engagements, has demonstrated both courage in battle and acuity in strategy. More importantly, he possesses that intangible quality that makes men willing to follow, to endure hardship, to risk death at his word. His troops, a polyglot mix of Spanish tribesmen, Numidian cavalry, Libyan infantry, and Carthaginian citizens, view him not merely as a commander, but as a figure approaching the heroic, the legendary. Rome watches events in Spain with increasing unease. A treaty supposedly limits Carthaginian expansion north of the Ebro River, but Hannibal's power grows regardless, his army swelling with recruits, his treasury filling with Spanish silver. When Hannibal besieges Saguntum, a city south of the Ebro but claimed as a Roman ally, Rome demands he withdraw. Hannibal refuses. The siege continues for 8 months, the city finally falling through starvation and assault. Rome sends an ultimatum to Carthage: surrender Hannibal or face war. The Carthaginian Senate meets to consider Rome's demand. They debate, some counselling accommodation, others defiance. Finally, a Roman envoy stands before them and makes a dramatic gesture, gathering his toga to form a fold. "In this fold," he declares, "I carry both peace and war. Choose which you will have." The senior Carthaginian senator replies, "Give us whichever you prefer." The Roman lets the fold fall open. "Then I give you war." It is 218 BC, and the Second Punic War begins. Hannibal does not wait for Rome to bring war to Spain or Africa. Instead, he conceives a plan so audacious that it seems to border on madness. He will march overland from Spain to Italia itself, crossing rivers and mountains that have never seen an army of such size, striking at Rome's heartland before they can fully prepare their defences. It is a gambler's strategy, dependent on speed, surprise, and the hope that Rome's Italian allies might abandon them when faced with a Carthaginian army on their soil. In the spring of 218 BC, Hannibal departs New Carthage at the head of an enormous host. Ancient sources vary in their precise counts, but the army numbers somewhere near 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants, massive North African elephants standing as tall as 12 feet at the shoulder, trained for battle, carrying howdahs from which archers and javelin throwers can rain death upon enemy formations. The army is cosmopolitan, drawing from the full extent of Carthaginian influence. Spanish swordsmen fierce in close combat, Balearic slingers whose lead bullets can crack bone at 100 yards, Numidian light cavalry capable of harassment tactics and lightning raids, Libyan heavy infantry forming the army's disciplined core. The march north through Spain proceeds relatively smoothly. Hannibal has spent years securing these territories, and his passage is more triumphant procession than invasion. But as the army crosses the Pyrenees into Gaul, the nature of the expedition changes. Not all Gallic tribes are friendly or neutral. Some see Hannibal's army as an opportunity for plunder rather than alliance. Ambushes become common, requiring Hannibal to detach forces for security, to negotiate passages, to fight when diplomacy fails. By the time the army reaches the Rhone River, its numbers have already diminished noticeably. The crossing of the Rhone presents immense logistical challenges. The river runs wide and swift, its current capable of overturning boats, sweeping away swimmers. The Carthaginians build rafts and requisition boats from local tribes, ferrying the army across in multiple waves. But the elephants pose a unique problem. Some are coaxed aboard large reinforced rafts disguised to look like extensions of the riverbank. Others panic at the water, bellowing and thrashing, their mahouts working desperately to maintain control. Several elephants jump or fall into the river, submerging completely, only to survive by walking along the riverbed with their trunks raised above the surface like breathing tubes. It is a strange and almost surreal sight. The dark shape of a submerged elephant moving beneath the water, its trunk breaking the surface like some primordial creature from mythology. Beyond the Rhone, the Alps rise against the sky, their peaks white with permanent snow, their slopes disappearing into clouds. It is early autumn when Hannibal's army reaches the mountains, later than ideal but driven by the timeline of the campaign. Local Gallic guides are hired, though their reliability is questionable. Some serve faithfully, others plan treachery, seeing the army as prey for ambush in the narrow mountain passes. The ascent begins in relatively mild conditions, the army following ancient trade routes that wind upward through valleys and along ridges. But as they climb higher, the temperature drops, the air thins, the vegetation gives way to bare rock and ice. Autumn storms sweep across the peaks, bringing snow that falls thick and silent, covering the narrow trails, hiding crevasses and drop-offs. Men trudge forward in single file, the army stretched across miles of mountain terrain, unable to maintain formation, vulnerable to attack from the high ground. And the attacks come. Mountain tribes, Gauls who know every peak and pass, roll boulders down upon the marching columns, sending massive stones crashing into ranks of soldiers who have no room to maneuver, no way to respond. Men are crushed, knocked from the path to fall screaming into the void, their cries swallowed by the wind. Pack animals lose their footing and tumble down slopes, taking their loads of supplies with them. The army's supplies begin to run dangerously low. Food, fodder for animals, even wood for fires becomes scarce at these altitudes. The elephants suffer terribly. Bred into the warm climates of Africa and Spain, they have no adaptation for cold. Their handlers wrap them in whatever blankets and skins can be spared, but it is insufficient. The elephants stumble on icy paths, their massive feet finding no purchase on frozen stone. When they slip, there is no way to arrest their fall. Several tumble from the path, their anguished trumpeting echoing across the mountains as they plummet into darkness. The survivors grow increasingly weak, their eyes dull, their movements sluggish from cold and starvation. For 15 days the army struggles through the Alps. Men freeze in their sleep, dying quietly in the night, their bodies stiff by morning. Others succumb to altitude sickness, gasping for air that seems too thin to fill lungs. Desertion becomes common despite the certain death it means. Some soldiers simply sit down in the snow and refuse to continue, preferring to die in place rather than endure another step. Hannibal moves among his troops constantly, sharing their hardships, offering encouragement, pointing toward the descent, toward Italia, toward the purpose that has brought them to this frozen hell. Finally, the army reaches the summit and begins its descent down the Italian side. But this proves even more treacherous than the ascent. The trail is covered in old snow, compacted and icy, overlain with fresh powder that hides the slickness beneath. Soldiers slide and fall, tumbling into one another, creating avalanches of bodies and equipment. At one point, the path is blocked by a rock slide so extensive that there is no way around. Hannibal orders his engineers to clear it, and for 4 days the army waits while men work to break apart and move massive boulders. According to Livy, they heat the rocks with fire and then douse them with sour wine, the rapid cooling causing the stone to crack and fracture. When the army finally emerges from the Alps into the broad plains of northern Italia, half their number is gone. Of 90,000 infantry, perhaps 45,000 remain. The cavalry has fared somewhat better, but still suffered losses. Of the 37 elephants that began the journey, fewer than 20 survive, many of those in poor condition. Yet those who remain have accomplished something unprecedented in Mediterranean warfare. They have crossed the Alps with an army, appearing in Italia not from expected routes along the coast, but from the north, from mountains thought impassable to any force of significant size. Rome's response to Hannibal's arrival in Italia is one of shock mixed with disbelief. The consuls, having prepared for a war in Spain and Africa, must rapidly redirect their forces to defend the homeland. One consul, Publius Cornelius Scipio, has already departed for Spain when news reaches him of Hannibal's Alpine crossing. He returns with what forces he can gather and moves north to engage the Carthaginian army near the Ticinus River. The Battle of Ticinus is not particularly large, more a cavalry skirmish than a full engagement, but it demonstrates immediately that Rome faces an extraordinary threat. Hannibal's cavalry, led by Numidian horsemen who are perhaps the finest light cavalry in the world, completely outmaneuvers the Roman horse. Scipio himself is wounded and nearly captured, saved only by the intervention of his 17-year-old son, also named Publius Cornelius Scipio, who will one day earn the cognomen Africanus for his own victories. The Romans withdraw, having learned that their cavalry is badly overmatched. Winter approaches, and normally this would mean a pause in campaigning, armies retiring to winter quarters to wait out the cold and mud. But Hannibal cannot afford to wait. His army needs supplies, needs allies, needs momentum. When the consul Sempronius Longus arrives with reinforcements and takes joint command with the wounded Scipio, Hannibal sets a trap. The Trebia River runs cold and swift, swollen with winter rains and snowmelt from the mountains. On a December morning, Hannibal sends his Numidian cavalry to harass the Roman camp. Sempronius, eager for battle and confident in Rome's military superiority, orders his legions to cross the Trebia and engage. The Roman soldiers wade into the icy water, which reaches to their chests, soaking them thoroughly. On the far side, they form up and march toward where Hannibal's army waits in battle formation. What the Romans do not know is that Hannibal has hidden 2,000 troops, infantry and cavalry mixed, in a ravine along the likely line of Roman advance. As the battle begins and the Roman centre engages the Carthaginian infantry, these hidden troops emerge from concealment and strike the Roman rear. Simultaneously, Hannibal's superior cavalry sweeps around the Roman flanks. The Romans find themselves attacked from 3 sides, wet and cold and increasingly panicked. The centre holds for a while, some 10,000 legionaries fighting their way forward through the Carthaginian lines and escaping to the city of Placentia, but the rest of the army is destroyed. 14,000 Romans die on the banks of the Trebia, many drowning as they try to escape back across the river, their limbs too numb from cold to swim. Through the winter, Hannibal rests his army in northern Italia, sending emissaries to Gallic tribes, recruiting reinforcements, preparing for the spring campaign. His presence alone is enough to unnerve Rome. The Senate raises new legions, appoints new consuls, debates strategy. Some advocate for a defensive approach, protecting Rome itself and letting Hannibal exhaust himself trying to besiege fortified cities without proper siege equipment. Others argue for aggressive engagement, seeking to destroy Hannibal's army in open battle where Roman numbers and discipline should prevail. In the spring of 217 BC, Hannibal marches south. The new consul, Gaius Flaminius, has taken position to block the obvious route, but Hannibal finds another path, leading his army through marshes so extensive that the troops march for 3 days and nights through waist-deep water, unable to rest on anything approaching dry ground. The elephants, already weakened from the Alpine crossing, suffer further. All but one die during or shortly after this miserable passage. Hannibal himself loses sight in one eye to infection, but he drives forward relentlessly. Flaminius, learning that Hannibal has bypassed his position, pursues in haste, eager to bring the invader to battle. But Hannibal is the pursuer here, not the pursued. He leads the Roman army along the northern shore of Lake Trasimene, through a narrow passage between the lake and steep hills. Flaminius, focused on catching Hannibal, marches his legions into this confined space without proper reconnaissance. It is the morning of June 21st, 217 BC, and a thick fog has risen from the lake, reducing visibility to mere yards. Hannibal has spent the night positioning his troops on the hills overlooking the narrow passage. As the Roman column extends along the shore, strung out and vulnerable, the Carthaginians attack from the heights. The Romans, caught completely by surprise in the fog, cannot form proper battle lines. Units become confused, losing contact with adjacent formations, unable to see commands or signals. Carthaginian troops pour down the hillsides, driving Romans into the lake, cutting off any retreat. The battle devolves into massacre. Flaminius himself dies fighting near the front of the column, struck down by a Gallic warrior who recognizes the consul. Without leadership, without visibility, without any possibility of organized resistance, the Roman army disintegrates. Some soldiers surrender, some try to fight their way clear, but most are driven into Lake Trasimene. The water becomes a death trap. Soldiers, weighed down by armor and equipment, sink immediately. Others thrash in the shallows, trying to swim in full military gear, easy targets for Carthaginian javelins and arrows. By the time the fog lifts, perhaps 3 hours after the ambush began, 15,000 Romans are dead, another 10,000 captured. The lake's edge is choked with bodies, its waters stained red, the shore littered with abandoned equipment. News of the disaster reaches Rome in stages, each report more devastating than the last. First comes word that there has been a battle, then that it was a defeat, finally that an entire consular army has been annihilated and the consul himself is dead. Panic spreads through the city. Hannibal is in Italia with a victorious army and apparently no force capable of stopping him. Mothers weep in the streets, fearing for sons in the legions. Senators debate emergency measures. The people demand action, protection, some assurance that Rome itself will not fall. The Senate responds by appointing a dictator, a constitutional mechanism reserved for times of extreme crisis. The man chosen is Quintus Fabius Maximus, an experienced commander known for caution rather than boldness. Fabius assesses the situation and reaches a controversial conclusion. Rome cannot defeat Hannibal in open battle. Every time they have tried, disaster has followed. Therefore, Rome will not offer battle. Instead, Fabius implements a strategy of shadowing Hannibal's army, harassing supply lines, avoiding direct engagement, essentially waiting for Hannibal to exhaust himself. This strategy, which will become known as Fabian tactics, is deeply unpopular. Romans view it as cowardice, a shameful avoidance of honourable combat. Fabius earns the mocking nickname Cunctator, the delayer. But he persists, his army always within sight of Hannibal's, never close enough to be forced into battle. He burns crops and villages before Hannibal can reach them, denies the Carthaginian supply, makes the Italian countryside itself into an enemy. Hannibal roams virtually unchallenged, winning minor engagements, but unable to achieve the decisive breakthrough that might shatter Roman resolve. Yet time is not necessarily Hannibal's enemy. His continued presence in Italia has an effect on Rome's allies. The Italian peninsula is not a unified nation but a complex network of treaties and alliances, with many cities bound to Rome more by fear or pragmatic calculation than love. As Hannibal demonstrates Rome's apparent inability to protect these allies, some begin to waver. A few, particularly in southern Italia where Greek culture remains strong and memories of Roman conquest are more recent, switch sides, offering supplies and reinforcements to Hannibal. Fabius's 6-month term as dictator expires, and the political mood in Rome swings back toward confrontation. The people, tired of seeing Hannibal march at will through Italia, elect consuls who promise decisive action. For the campaigning season of 216 BC, Rome raises the largest army in its history, 8 full legions plus allies, perhaps 86,000 infantry and cavalry combined. The command is given to the consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, who are instructed to find Hannibal and destroy his army once and for all. The two armies converge near the small town of Cannae in southeastern Italia, where Hannibal has captured a Roman supply depot. The location favours open battle, flat plains ideal for infantry formations and cavalry operations. As the armies deploy on the morning of August 2nd, 216 BC, the size disparity is obvious. The Roman army extends in a massive line, the legions in the centre densely packed, their flanks covered by cavalry. Hannibal fields perhaps 50,000 troops, outnumbered by nearly 2-1, yet he shows no sign of concern. Hannibal's deployment is unusual, even perverse by conventional military wisdom. He places his Gallic and Spanish infantry in the centre, formed in a convex arc that bulges toward the Romans. His reliable Libyan heavy infantry he positions on the wings of this centre formation, slightly back from the front line. His cavalry is split between the flanks, heavy cavalry under his brother Mago on the left, Numidian light horse on the right. The battle begins with cavalry actions on both flanks. On the Roman right, Hannibal's heavy cavalry charges into the Roman horse and through ferocity and skill routs them entirely, driving them from the field. The Roman cavalry on the left fares somewhat better against the Numidian light horse, but remains engaged and unable to affect the infantry battle. In the centre, the Roman legions advance like an unstoppable tide, their weight and momentum pushing forward against the bulging Carthaginian line. This is exactly what Hannibal expects, what he has planned. As the Romans push forward, driving the Gallic and Spanish infantry back, the convex arc begins to invert, becoming concave, bending like a bow under strain but not breaking. The Roman legions, sensing victory, press harder, packing themselves more tightly together as they pursue the apparently retreating enemy. And as they do, the Libyan heavy infantry on the wings of Hannibal's centre wheel inward, turning to attack the Roman flanks. Simultaneously, Hannibal's victorious cavalry, having routed the Roman horse on the right, circles behind the Roman army and strikes their rear. The Roman army, 86,000 strong, finds itself surrounded on all sides. The legionaries in the rear ranks, feeling the cavalry attack from behind, try to turn to face this new threat, creating confusion and compression. Those in the centre, already packed tightly in the pursuit, find themselves unable to manoeuvre, unable even to raise their weapons effectively. Shield presses against back, arm tangles with arm. The Carthaginians close in from every direction, stabbing with short swords, thrusting with spears, slaughtering Romans who can barely move, let alone fight. The killing continues for hours under the August sun. The dust raised by tens of thousands of feet turns the air brown and makes breathing difficult. The ground becomes slick with blood. Romans die standing up, held upright by the press of bodies around them even after life has fled. Others, in the crush, suffocate without ever receiving a wound. Some legionaries in the rear manage to break free and flee, but the majority are trapped in a killing zone from which there is no escape. By the time the sun sets on August 2nd, 216 BC, perhaps 50,000 to 70,000 Romans lie dead on the plains of Cannae. The consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus is dead. Both consuls from the previous year who served as officers in this battle are dead. 80 senators serving in the legions are dead. It is the single bloodiest day in Roman military history, possibly in the history of ancient warfare. Hannibal's army suffers losses too, perhaps 6,000 dead, but the disparity is staggering. According to the ancient historian Livy, Hannibal's officers, jubilant after the victory, urge him to march immediately on Rome itself. "Give me 5 days," one allegedly says, "and you will dine on the Capitoline Hill." But Hannibal refuses. Whether from caution, from understanding that Rome's walls and garrison would still be formidable even after Cannae, or from some other strategic calculation, he does not march on the city. Instead, he continues his policy of trying to break Rome's alliance system, hoping that this devastating defeat will finally convince Rome's Italian allies to abandon a cause that appears lost. The news reaches Rome in stages, each messenger bringing worse tidings. At first, there is hope that the initial reports are exaggerated, that the defeat is serious but not catastrophic. But as survivors straggle back, as the full scope of the disaster becomes clear, Rome confronts an existential crisis unlike any in its history. More than a quarter of Rome's military-age male citizens are dead or captured. Allied communities are wavering. Hannibal's army sits victorious in southern Italia, yet incredibly, impossibly, Rome does not surrender. The Senate meets in emergency session. The praetor Marcus Junius Pera addresses the assembled senators, his voice steady despite the catastrophe. "We have been defeated in the greatest battle, the consul and his army destroyed. But the Republic stands. We will raise new legions, equip new soldiers, send new commanders. We will continue the fight." And somehow Rome does exactly that. Boys too young for military service by normal standards are enlisted. Slaves are freed and armed, an unprecedented step. Rome's Latin allies, despite the disaster, remain mostly loyal. New legions take shape with astonishing speed. This Roman response, this refusal to accept defeat even after losing more soldiers in a single day than most nations could field in total, marks a turning point in the war, though not the one Hannibal intended. He has won the perfect battle, achieved a tactical masterpiece studied by military commanders for more than 2 millennia. But he cannot translate tactical brilliance into strategic victory, because his opponent simply refuses to acknowledge defeat. Rome will not surrender, will not negotiate, will not accept any peace that does not secure its survival and dominance. Faced with this implacable will, Hannibal's genius begins to work against a problem that cannot be solved through clever tactics and battlefield superiority alone. In the years following Cannae, Hannibal continues to operate in southern Italia with considerable success. Several major cities, including Capua, the second largest city in Italia after Rome, switch sides to join him. Rome's alliance system, seemingly unshakable, begins to fracture under the strain. But the fractures are not universal, and those allies who remain loyal provide Rome with resources and manpower to continue the struggle. The Senate, learning from repeated disasters, returns to Fabius's strategy of avoidance. The new policy is simple. Do not engage Hannibal's main army in pitched battle. Shadow him, harass him, cut his supplies, besiege cities that have joined him, but never give him another opportunity for the kind of decisive engagement at which he excels. It is warfare as attrition, unglamorous and frustrating for a martial culture like Rome's, but effective. Fabius Maximus, no longer mocked as the delayer, but respected as the shield of Rome, implements this strategy with patient persistence. His armies, and there are multiple Roman armies now, raised through extraordinary effort, follow Hannibal wherever he goes, never close enough to be forced into battle, never far enough away that he can operate freely. When Hannibal besieges a town, Roman forces attack his supply lines. When he tries to bring provisions from allied territories, Roman raids intercept them. The war becomes a slow strangulation, Hannibal's freedom of action gradually constricting, his ability to feed and supply his army becoming increasingly difficult. Hannibal's attempts to break this stranglehold produce scattered successes, but no breakthrough. He marches north, then south, seeking battle or advantage, but the Romans refuse to cooperate. His requests to Carthage for reinforcements are met with inadequate responses. The Carthaginian Senate, focused on defending Spain and dealing with threats closer to home, sends too little, too late. Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal does eventually cross the Alps with a relief army in 207 BC, but before the brothers can unite their forces, Hasdrubal is defeated and killed at the Battle of the Metaurus River. Hasdrubal's severed head is thrown into Hannibal's camp, a brutal message about the futility of expecting Carthaginian reinforcements. For 15 years, Hannibal remains in Italia, winning battles but losing the war. His army slowly dwindles through constant small-scale actions, disease, desertion. The Italian allies who joined him find themselves besieged and eventually subdued by Roman determination. Capua falls after a long siege in 211 BC, and Rome punishes the city's betrayal with such severity: executions of the leadership, enslavement of the population, dissolution of the city's government, that other wavering allies reconsider their choices. While Hannibal maneuvers in Italia, Rome fights on multiple fronts. In Spain, Roman commanders work to undermine Carthaginian control, achieving mixed results until a young general begins to demonstrate exceptional ability. His name is Publius Cornelius Scipio, the son of the consul wounded at Ticinus, the teenager who saved his father on the battlefield. Now in his mid-20s, Scipio takes command in Spain and shows a combination of tactical skill, strategic vision, and charismatic leadership that marks him as potentially Hannibal's equal. Scipio studies Hannibal's tactics, learning from Rome's defeats. He captures New Carthage in a daring assault, depriving Carthage of its Spanish capital and primary base. He defeats Carthaginian armies using their own methods against them, employing cavalry more effectively than previous Roman commanders, using strategic surprise and operational mobility. By 206 BC, Carthaginian power in Spain is broken, the source of silver and recruits that sustained their war effort now in Roman hands. With Spain secured, Scipio returns to Rome and proposes a plan so audacious that many senators initially dismiss it as reckless: invade Africa and threaten Carthage itself, forcing them to recall Hannibal from Italia. It is a strategic reversal, taking the war directly to the enemy homeland, just as Hannibal did to Rome. After significant debate, the Senate grants Scipio permission, though with limited official support. Many of his troops are volunteers, his fleet assembled through a combination of allied contributions and personal financing. Scipio lands in Africa in 204 BC with an army of perhaps 30,000 men. The region is not unfamiliar with Roman presence. The failed expedition during the First Punic War occurred in the same area, but this time the circumstances are different. Rome is stronger, more experienced, more determined. Scipio immediately begins operations against Carthaginian forces and their Numidian allies, achieving success through a combination of military action and diplomatic maneuvering. The key diplomatic achievement is securing the alliance of Massinissa, a Numidian prince who controls some of the finest cavalry in Africa. Massinissa has personal grievances against Carthage and is impressed by Scipio's leadership. With Numidian cavalry on his side, Scipio neutralizes one of Carthage's traditional advantages. The battles that follow at the Bagradus River and the Great Plains see Carthaginian armies defeated, their cities threatened, their countryside ravaged. In Carthage, panic begins to set in. For decades, the war has been fought far away in Italia and Spain. Now Roman legions march within sight of the city's walls. The Carthaginian Senate, facing existential threat, sends urgent messages to Hannibal: "Return home, defend the city, save us from Scipio, as we hoped you would conquer Rome." Hannibal receives the order in southern Italia in 203 BC. For 15 years he has remained undefeated on Italian soil, a constant thorn in Rome's side, yet unable to deliver the final blow that might have ended the war. Now, recalled not in triumph but in desperation, he must abandon his campaign and return to defend the homeland he left as a young man of 29. He is now 44, most of his adult life spent in enemy territory, his best years consumed by a war that has ground down to exhausted stalemate. The evacuation of Hannibal's army from Italia is a logistical challenge. Ships must be assembled, tens of thousands of troops transported across the Mediterranean, all while Roman fleets patrol and potentially threaten, but the withdrawal succeeds, and, by late 203 BC, Hannibal has landed in Africa and begun preparing to confront Scipio. The two generals, the greatest commanders of their generation, possibly of the entire ancient world, have never faced each other in battle, though each has studied the other extensively. Hannibal through intelligence reports and captured officers who served under Scipio in Spain, Scipio through detailed analysis of Hannibal's campaigns, learning from Rome's defeats as much as its victories. Now, after years of indirect confrontation, they will meet on the field. Before the battle, legend holds that Hannibal and Scipio meet face-to-face for negotiations. Ancient historians describe a conversation between two men who respect each other's abilities, each recognizing in the other a kindred spirit, warriors who understand the reality of command and the burden of decision. They discuss terms of peace, but the gap is too wide. Carthage, facing invasion, is willing to make concessions but not surrender. Rome, having endured 15 years of Hannibal in Italia, will accept nothing less than decisive victory. The meeting ends cordially but without resolution. Battle is inevitable. The armies meet on the plains of Zama, approximately 5 days' march southwest of Carthage, on October the 19th, 202 BC. Hannibal fields perhaps 45,000 troops, including the veterans from his Italian campaign, newly recruited African infantry and war elephants, dozens of them, though they are hastily trained, nowhere near the quality of the elephants he brought across the Alps 16 years ago. Scipio's army is slightly smaller, perhaps 35,000, but includes Massinissa's superb Numidian cavalry and legionaries who have fought successfully in Spain and now in Africa. Hannibal places his elephants in front, hoping to disrupt the Roman formations before the infantry engage. Behind them, he arranges his infantry in 3 lines. First the new recruits and mercenaries, then the African infantry, finally his Italian veterans in reserve, the men who have followed him for years, his most reliable troops held back for the decisive moment. Scipio, anticipating the elephant charge, arranges his legions in a modified formation. Instead of the typical compact lines, he creates lanes through his formation, gaps through which the elephants can pass without crashing into the Roman ranks. Skirmishers are positioned to harass and wound the elephants, directing them into these lanes or driving them back into the Carthaginian lines. The battle begins with a elephant charge. The massive beasts lumber forward, their trumpeting echoing across the plain, their bulk meant to terrify and scatter the Roman forces. But Scipio's preparation pays off. Roman trumpets and horns blast, creating a cacophony that frightens the already poorly trained elephants. Javelins and arrows wound them, adding pain to confusion. Some elephants charge straight ahead into the lanes, passing harmlessly through the Roman lines. Others panic and wheel back, trampling through their own troops, creating chaos in the Carthaginian front ranks. The infantry battle unfolds in stages. The Roman hastati, the youngest, least experienced legionaries who traditionally fight in the front line, engage Hannibal's first line of troops and slowly drive them back. As the battle grinds forward, Scipio's formation has the advantage of fresh troops rotating into combat while Hannibal's lines are committed and becoming exhausted. The critical moment comes when Scipio's cavalry, having driven the Carthaginian horse from the field, circles behind Hannibal's position and attacks his rear. It is Cannae in reverse. The tactical masterpiece that Hannibal executed 16 years ago, Scipio now employs against him. The Carthaginian army, caught between Roman infantry pressing from the front and cavalry hammering the rear, begins to collapse. Hannibal's veterans fight with desperate courage, but they are outnumbered and surrounded. The battle turns into a rout. Thousands of Carthaginians are cut down in flight, the survivors scattering across the countryside. Hannibal himself escapes with his life, fleeing the field with a small group of cavalry, but his army is destroyed. His legend, built over 16 years of unbroken victories against Rome, ends in the dust of Zama. The irony is inescapable. Defeated by a Roman who learned from Hannibal's own tactics, overcome by the methods he himself pioneered. Carthage, with its army destroyed and Scipio's forces poised outside the city, sues for peace. The terms Rome demands are devastating. Carthage must surrender all but 10 warships, rendering it defenseless against naval attack, pay an indemnity of 10,000 talents over 50 years, impoverishing the state, surrender all territory outside Africa, losing its Spanish Empire and Mediterranean islands, acknowledge Roman supremacy and agree not to wage war without Roman permission. It is the peace of a defeated power, reducing Carthage from major empire to client state. The Carthaginian Senate accepts, having no alternative. The Second Punic War ends in 201 BC, 17 years after Hannibal crossed the Alps, 41 years after the First Punic War concluded. Rome has survived its greatest challenge, its existence threatened as never before, yet ultimately triumphant. Scipio earns the cognomen Africanus for his victory, and returns to Rome as its greatest living general. Hannibal survives and even serves for a time in Carthaginian politics, attempting to reform the government and restore prosperity to his defeated homeland. But Rome watches him constantly, suspicious and fearful, never forgetting the terror he brought to Italia. Eventually, Roman pressure forces him into exile. He flees to the Seleucid Empire, then to Bithynia, always moving, always pursued. In 183 BC, rather than be captured and delivered to Rome, he takes poison. His last words, according to ancient sources, are bitter. "Let us relieve the Romans of their anxiety. They cannot wait for an old man to die." The decades following the Second Punic War see Rome ascend to undisputed dominance of the Mediterranean. Carthage, stripped of its military power and burdened with indemnity payments, focuses on recovery, and remarkably, it succeeds. Within a few decades, Carthaginian merchants rebuild prosperity. Its fields produce abundant harvests. Its population recovers. The city, once the capital of an empire, thrives as a commercial centre, trading throughout the Mediterranean, its wealth growing despite the political and military restrictions imposed by the peace treaty. Yet in Rome, Carthage's recovery breeds fear and hatred in equal measure. For many Romans, particularly those old enough to remember Hannibal's invasion, Carthage can never be trusted, never be allowed to regain strength. Chief among these is Marcus Porcius Cato, known as Cato the Elder, a senator of uncompromising views and considerable rhetorical skill. Cato travels to Carthage as part of a diplomatic mission in the 150s BC and returns disturbed by what he sees, not a defeated city struggling to survive, but a prosperous metropolis full of vibrant commerce and growing population. Cato begins a campaign in the Senate that will continue for the rest of his life. He argues that Carthage remains a threat, that its recovery proves its resilience, that Rome will never be secure while its old enemy still exists. He ends every speech he gives in the Senate, regardless of the topic being discussed, with the same 5 words: Ceterum censeo Carthaginem esse delendam. Furthermore, I think Carthage must be destroyed. It becomes his obsession, his unceasing refrain. Other senators initially dismiss his fixation as paranoia, but gradually Cato's position gains adherents. Carthage, meanwhile, finds itself in an impossible situation. The peace treaty forbids it from waging war without Roman permission, yet it faces increasing aggression from Numidia, now a Roman ally under King Massinissa. The Numidians encroach on Carthaginian territory, seize borderlands, provoke incidents. Carthage appeals to Rome for protection or permission to defend itself, but Rome repeatedly sides with Numidia, either ignoring Carthaginian complaints or ruling in favour of further territorial losses. By 149 BC, the situation becomes untenable. Faced with yet another Numidian incursion, Carthage finally raises an army and fights back without Roman permission. It is technically a violation of the peace treaty, and Rome seizes on this pretext. The Senate debates and decides. Carthage must be punished. An army is raised, ships assembled, and a consul is appointed to lead the expedition, Scipio Aemilianus, grandson by adoption of Scipio Africanus, the victor of Zama. Rome's demands, when presented to Carthage, are calculated to be unacceptable. First, Carthage must surrender 300 children of noble families as hostages, a guarantee of good behaviour. The Carthaginians, horrified but seeing no alternative, comply. The children are handed over, tears and anguish filling the harbour, as families are torn apart. Then Rome demands that Carthage surrender all weapons and armour. Again, painfully, Carthage complies, delivering thousands of swords, spears, shields, suits of armour to the Roman camp, disarming itself completely. Finally, Rome reveals its true demand. The city of Carthage must be abandoned. The population must relocate at least 10 miles inland, away from the coast, abandoning their harbour, their homes, their temples, everything that makes Carthage what it is. This demand is a death sentence for a maritime commercial culture. The Carthaginian delegates, hearing this, return to the city in despair. The Carthaginian response is not surrender but defiance. Faced with the choice between extinction and resistance, they choose to fight. The city mobilizes for war in a frenzy of desperate preparation. Weapons must be forged from nothing. Blacksmiths work around the clock, melting down bronze from statues and temple ornaments, hammering out swords and spear points. Women cut their long hair to be twisted into bowstrings for catapults. Slaves are freed and armed. The city's walls, among the most formidable in the Mediterranean, are manned and prepared for siege. The Third Punic War begins not as a war of armies contesting supremacy, but as a siege, an execution already decided, the condemned simply refusing to go quietly. The Roman army surrounds Carthage, cutting off land routes, while the fleet blocks the harbour. But the city does not fall quickly. The fortifications are too strong, the defenders too determined. Initial Roman assaults are repulsed with heavy casualties. The siege settles into a grinding stalemate. For 3 years, Carthage endures the siege. Supplies run short, then run out entirely. The population begins to starve, resorting to eating leather, then rats, then things best left unspoken. Disease spreads through the crowded city, claiming lives as surely as any Roman sword. Yet still, the city holds. Defenders fight from the massive walls, repair breaches overnight, launch sorties against Roman positions. It is a testament to human endurance, a city choosing slow death by starvation over surrender. In 147 BC, the Roman Senate, frustrated by the lack of progress, appoints Scipio Aemilianus as consul and supreme commander, despite his youth. Scipio brings renewed vigour to the siege, tightening the blockade, preventing any supplies from reaching the city, building a massive mole across the harbour entrance to prevent even fishing boats from slipping in or out. The noose draws tighter. In the spring of 146 BC, Scipio orders the final assault. Roman siege equipment batters the walls, creating breaches in fortifications that have stood for centuries. Legionaries pour through the gaps, fighting their way into the city. But the battle does not end with the walls' fall. It has only begun. The Carthaginians retreat from the outer defences into the city itself and fight house to house, street by street, building by building. Every structure becomes a fortress, every roof a fighting position. Romans must clear each building individually, fighting room to room, floor by floor. The defenders use the city's vertical structure, fighting from rooftops and upper stories, hurling stones and furniture down on the Romans advancing below. The battle rages for 6 days, the longest continuous urban combat in ancient history. Slowly, inexorably, the Romans advance, capturing the market district, the residential neighbourhoods, pushing toward the city centre and the Bursa citadel. The streets run with blood, buildings burn, the smoke rising in thick black columns visible for miles. Carthaginian civilians, those who have survived the years of starvation and now the house-to-house fighting, flee before the Roman advance, crowding into the shrinking area still under Carthaginian control. Finally, the surviving defenders and civilians, perhaps 50,000 people, retreat to the Temple of Eschmoun on the Bursa Hill, the last defensible position. They barricade themselves inside, hoping for mercy or miracle. Scipio orders the temple to be fired. As flames consume the structure, some defenders rush out to fight and die. Others remain inside, choosing immolation over capture. Among them, tradition holds, is Hasdrubal, the Carthaginian commander who earlier surrendered to Scipio. His wife, disgusted by his surrender and preferring death to slavery, throws herself and her children into the flames. When the fighting finally ends, Carthage is a smoking ruin. The 50,000 survivors are sold into slavery, dispersed across the Mediterranean, their families broken, their identities erased. Scipio orders the systematic destruction of the city. Buildings are torn down, rubble spread, the foundations themselves excavated and scattered. The city burns for 17 days, the flames consuming everything flammable, the heat cracking stone, melting metal, reducing centuries of architecture and art to ash and slag. A later tradition, recorded by Roman historians but questioned by modern scholars, holds that Scipio ordered the ruins sown with salt to render the land barren and ensure Carthage could never rise again. Whether this actually occurred remains debated, but the symbolism captures the thoroughness of Rome's vengeance. Carthage, the mighty rival, the ancient enemy, the city that produced Hannibal, is erased from existence. The site is cursed, declared forbidden ground. Where a great city once stood, where ships filled a magnificent harbour, where markets bustled with traders from across the known world, there is only silence and desolation. The Punic Wars are over. The 118-year struggle for Mediterranean dominance has ended not with a negotiated peace, but with genocide, with the complete elimination of one of the ancient world's greatest civilizations. Rome stands alone, supreme and unchallenged, having defeated its greatest rival, having survived its closest brush with extinction, having demonstrated a capacity for both endurance and ruthlessness that will define its imperial character for centuries to come, yet the victory is haunted. Plutarch records that Scipio Aemilianus, standing amid the burning ruins of Carthage, weeps. When asked why he mourns Rome's greatest triumph, Scipio quotes Homer, speaking of Troy's fall, "A day will come when sacred Troy shall perish, and Priam and his people shall be slain." His companion asks what he means, and Scipio replies that he weeps for the fate of cities, for the rise and inevitable fall of all human endeavours, and perhaps in that moment he contemplates Rome's own distant future. The cost of the Punic Wars defies easy calculation. Ancient sources suggest more than 1 million people died across the 3 conflicts: soldiers and civilians, Roman and Carthaginian, Italian and African and Spanish. Entire cities were destroyed, populations enslaved or scattered, economies ruined. Rome itself was transformed, evolving from a regional Italian power into a Mediterranean superpower with territories stretching from Spain to Greece, from North Africa to the Alps. The wars forged Rome's imperial character, demonstrated that the Republic would endure any suffering, accept any sacrifice, commit any atrocity necessary to ensure its survival and dominance. Hannibal's ghost haunts Rome for generations. Children grow up on stories of his invasion, of elephants in the snow, of Cannae's slaughter. Roman generals study his tactics, seeking to emulate his genius while never forgetting that he ultimately failed. The name Hannibal ad portus, Hannibal's at the gates, becomes a phrase Romans use to denote immediate existential danger, a cultural memory of terror that persists long after the man himself is dead. For Carthage, there is no such enduring legacy. The city is destroyed so completely that most of its history survives only through the accounts of its enemies. Carthaginian literature, art, philosophy, religion, all are lost or survived only in fragments and Roman descriptions. The Punic language itself gradually dies, spoken by no one, remembered by none. Within a few generations, Carthage exists only as ruins and cautionary tale, a civilization erased. In the centuries that follow, Rome builds a new city on the site of Carthage, transforming it into a major provincial centre. This Roman Carthage becomes one of the empire's greatest cities, its harbour rebuilt, its streets laid out in grid pattern, its architecture reflecting Roman rather than Punic style. But it is a different city, bearing the same name but having no continuity with what came before. The original Carthage, the city of Dido and Hannibal, the maritime empire that controlled the western Mediterranean for centuries, is gone forever. The waves continue their timeless rhythm, rolling against the shores where Carthaginian ships once sailed, where Roman fleets once blockaded, where history turned on the outcomes of battles and sieges now silent for more than 2 millennia. The Mediterranean holds these memories in its depths, the drowned fleets of the First Punic War, the blood that flowed at Cannae, the ashes of Carthage scattered on the wind. Empires rise, clash, and fall, each believing itself eternal, each learning the hard lessons of hubris and mortality. Beneath stars that witnessed it all, unchanged and unchanging, the ancient world spins slowly into history, into legend, into the quiet realm of memory where all human struggles eventually rest. The Punic Wars ended not just a conflict, but an age, closed a chapter of Mediterranean history and opened another that would see Rome dominate for centuries until it too faced its own day of reckoning, its own flames, its own silence. The story is over, but its echoes remain, carried on winds that blow across ruins and waves that wash against shores where once great powers contended for supremacy, where once men fought and died for causes now barely remembered, where once cities stood that would never stand again. The Mediterranean remembers everything and forgets nothing. Patient witness to the rise and fall of civilizations, the endless cycle of ambition and destruction, glory and ruin, hope and ash. Hope